Well, folks, here we are at it's a cattle working clinic plus good horsemanship. That's what the gist of this was all about. And these are the calves that you saw a month ago that we fence weaned. And so now they're being handled, and where the next thing will happen to them is we'll bang test the heifers and then decide what he wants to do with the steers. So the cattle, there's the owner there, Mike, and he's good enough to let us have this clinic. So anyway, we had an opportunity to bring him in and work him and get him that much gentler, so when he does want to bang him, we can do it no sweat. Now, of course, we had a 30-mile-an-hour wind, that's kind of the way it works cowboying. But when you're pairing out, wind is not your friend. But working steers, they're touchy enough where it doesn't really matter. And then I'm showing the people, and for those of you that buy our horses from Mexico, that's my partner Enrique on the right, riding one of the horses from Mexico. And of course, that's me and Chinaco, my half-inch bosal. And I had the opportunity to get a probably 7-8 hour day out of Chinaco. So it was really a good deal for me. So the outgate, as you can see, is the 2 white posts over there. And for a clinic situation, you got to understand, we're not shipping. We're not under the gun. We're not weighing. We don't have a buyer standing there on one foot and then the other. None of that. All we're doing is I'm showing people how to work cattle as low stress as we possibly can, plus get a job done. And you'll watch this whole thing. If you watch the horses, you'll see what I did was I alternated everybody like a clock. Every time we'd put a steer in, I'd change riders. So on the corral on the left, as you're looking at it, I had some bait in there. I had 6 head of steers that just stood in there. Because remember, these are people that have never worked cattle. So I knew if I could get a critter close, he'd look at those other cattle and draw them like a magnet. Here I was explaining them about the different kinds of cattle. The yellow heifer's kind of a pup, and the red-headed one, the high-headed, it's like working sheep. The high-headed yearling in the sheep, you know he's going to sell out. So I would just I had a whole bunch of different types of cattle and good examples. Here's 2 gals from down by LA that did a really good job on their horses, and they're wanting to do this, which they don't have the experience. So I put them in a corner, and then they'll get their turn. But what I did was I placed people in corners, and that makes the corral round. And it saves cattle from balling up. And over in the other corner is a big, long water trough. And I'll put people over there later. But this is what I explained is if I'm going into the lead man, I want the man behind me. As I turn, I want him to leg yield his horse over and explain the different ways to point your horse, whether it's straight on or sideways, depending on what the situation is. So now we're giving this critter time to think. And you can't see the ears, but the fact is I get it over farther so we can see the cattle in the corral. And this is there again. After a while, I wasn't in on this. I just stood back and criticized them. They were on their own after we got things going. So now that critter, he'll see those other cattle, and that'll make him walk. And then his right eye, he'll see an escape. So he turns right and just walks out of the corral. That's what we're after. I tell you, cowboys they like working livestock. A lot of guys, the older you get, the more fun it is to work cattle in the corral than it is to brand. So this is what I enjoy doing. This is another situation where the man on the left, he's the student, and Enrique is the experienced rancher, my partner out of Mexico. And he's trying to help this man figure out where to be and what to do. So once again, the red Angus is got a little more fire in it than the black one. And the point there is to teach people how to read cattle. You can watch the way they move, and they'll get the other horse doing the same thing. Now please understand that as they went by, I've got the class holding roe deer, so we don't have a big wreck. This is all a controlled situation, and I do that on purpose. Because I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, she handed him the reins. That's when the husband gets yelling at the wife, and she just Sometimes they'll wait till they're done. Sometimes they don't. They'll hand them the reins and tell them what to do with that horse and leave. So I'm trying to avoid that scenario. So now's the time, like my friend Bob Snyder used to say, and Richard Rudnick, give them some air. Meaning, let them think a minute. Give them a chance. This is high-headed, so you got to be careful. Right there, it spotted those other cattle and went right in. So they gave the high-headed one time to think. And I know there's a whole lot of people that do this at 60 miles an hour, but I don't really care. What I'm trying to do is teach low-stress cattle handling. And by the way, if you don't ride well, you're not going to be very good at this. So what I like to try to get folks to do is to disengage the hindquarter, bring the forehand across, leg yield your horse. Now this is a good job, and if you, once again, I tell them, you see that ear tag flicking, that means that steer keeps looking back. And I keep telling them, you watch those ears, and they'll tell you when they're ready to go. The ears will flick forward when they see the bait inside the other corral, and then they'll walk right to it. Now the kid in the gate, he's on a 3-year-old colt that's really green. Well, we didn't want to set him up to fail, but I had to start weaning him. In other words, I had another rider with him for quite a while until he got his confidence up. And then I had to make him sit there by himself once and get situated. So a clinic like this is the most perfect place you could ever bring a colt if you want to get him introduced to working cattle. And that's why, nowadays there's team sorting, team penning, and whatever else there is. And it's just a crash and burn deal. And it's not good for colts, and it's not good for cattle, and it's fun. People do it for fun. So it's another sport to add to the list of non-ranch related events. Now this is another big, you guys have watched Handsome. That's Handsome there on the left, and both those horses are out of Mexico. But Handsome he's got that real good demeanor, and Austin, the man I got riding him, has got a really pond water demeanor. So this particular horse, it needs that kind of riding to make this work. And Austin's a good student because if you watch, he uses his body to adjust the horse. And that's all I wanted to see done. I mean, that was the main thing of the day, is that get your horse to move off your leg. Everything's not whipping back and forth with the front end. So here's the lady with the hackamore horse again. Her hands are behind the horns, so her hands are too long. And the buckskin on the right, Carrie Lynn, this lady, she loves working cattle and came to get experience. And you need to know, she made that horse. That horse is in the bridle. She just lives down the road a couple miles. But this was a fun day with a whole bunch of people that I asked them, even though there was a torrential wind, I said, is this working for you? And they said, I love it. I love doing it. So people really enjoy it, and what they find out is that their horse starts drawing like a magnet to the cattle. And then the people start looking at the cattle instead of the back of their horse's head, and everybody goes better. It's fun. And I really enjoy teaching it because this is, I've done this for a really long time, and I've been on both ends of the spectrum where it's done with your hat in your hand, chokes out and bent over, and you're trying to get things done for the trucks or the weather or the whoever. Well, here we get to slow down and actually school the horses and the cattle, because these cattle are getting schooled the same as the horses. And Mike, the owner, like I say, he was kind enough to let us put on the clinic, and he's a real firm believer in the Bud Williams low-stress cattle handling. Now, if you'll notice, I keep rotating. So here's two different riders. Now, Kevin, he's riding a nice little horse, and I'm able to help him understand the angles. And as soon as he figured out the angles, he got really good at this. And I tell people, it's math. And all you got to do is understand the angle and the pressure points on the eye, shoulder, and hip of a critter. And if you don't get running around, because the two things I told them they couldn't do, the two rules in the clinic. A, you cannot talk, and B, you cannot get out of a walk. So if they spilled them, it's like no big deal. They only went 12 feet, so it wasn't a lot of pressure. So now what happens when you work cattle is you come to a point where you've got a higher percentage of them that you've worked and a smaller percentage that haven't been worked. The smaller percentage, as you get down to the end, they start getting worried about being with the others because they've been standing there watching the rest of them go through the gate. So what I did was just shut the clinic down. Then Mike, the owner, and two cowboys went and put the cattle away. Now you notice that little black horse in the very back. That's that 3-year-old. And I told him, I said, you stay right with that horse in front of you and get that horse some confidence. So he got a lot done that day. So the colt just kind of followed along. But it works great. I mean, that's how you do this. And now that's Mike working the cattle. And he is a real big, firm believer in Bud Williams, which I am too. And if you don't know, Bud Williams was the Tom Dorrance of the livestock handling. And what he's doing is setting the cattle up to leave. And he's going to step over and pressure them and get a lead started. And then as soon as he gets a lead started, then he'll back off and let them walk out. That's why everybody's not yelling and trotting them up there. So this is what it looks like to have a cattle working, low stress cattle and good horsemanship clinic.